May 28, 1940. Inside Berlin's Reich Air Ministry, Reich Marshal Hermann Göring dismissed an intelligence briefing with visible contempt. The document described President Franklin Roosevelt's appeal to the U.S. Congress for an unprecedented expansion of American aircraft production, an ambition to manufacture 50,000 airplanes every year. The Americans must be desperate if they think such bragging will frighten us, Göring scoffed to his staff. They have no understanding of real industrial power. Let them try converting automobile factories. They'll soon discover that building combat aircraft demands far more than simple assembly lines. What Göring utterly failed to understand was that, in Detroit, a Danish immigrant named William Knudsen was already proving him dangerously wrong. The former head of General Motors, now serving the president for a symbolic salary of $1 a year as chief of wartime production, was orchestrating the largest industrial transformation the world had ever witnessed. Within less than 4 years, American factories would not merely achieve the supposedly impossible target Göring mocked. They would produce nearly 100,000 aircraft annually, while at the same time supplying 2 vast theaters of war across 2 oceans. The declaration that provoked such German scorn had been made on May 16, 1940. As German panzer divisions tore through France, Franklin Roosevelt stood before Congress and proclaimed, "I want to see this nation prepared with the capacity to produce at least 50,000 planes a year." The announcement was met with widespread skepticism, doubt that extended even to America's allies. In 1939, the United States had produced just 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Corps operated barely 1,700 combat planes, and most of them were already obsolete. Despite this reality, Roosevelt called for an astonishing 14-fold increase in production. At the center of the seemingly impossible goal stood William Knudsen, the engineering mastermind who would turn ambition into reality. When asked if he could possibly deliver output on such an enormous scale, presidential advisor Bernard Baruch gave a legendary answer. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. Knudsen walked away from a $300,000 annual salary to serve his adopted nation, bringing the logic and discipline of automotive mass production directly into aircraft manufacturing. The transformation began immediately. By December 1941, American factories were producing 2,000 military aircraft every month, a 20-fold increase in just 2 years. Ford Motor Company announced plans for a vast heavy bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing dramatically expanded its facilities in Seattle. Douglas Aircraft hired tens of thousands of new workers. The arsenal of democracy was rapidly coming to life. Nazi disbelief in American capabilities stemmed from a poisonous combination of racial ideology and willful ignorance. General Friedrich von Boeticher, Germany's military attaché in Washington from 1933 to 1941, sent home detailed and accurate assessments of American industrial mobilization. In a telegram dated December 1940, he warned, "American military production will reach unimaginable proportions." Berlin brushed aside these crucial warnings, dismissing them as defeatist exaggerations. When Boeticher met Hitler in February 1939 to discuss American industrial strength, the Führer ignored the intelligence and instead launched into rants about supposed American racial decay. Hitler declared Americans to be racially mixed and incapable of sustaining a prolonged war. This ideological arrogance would prove catastrophic. Such prejudice seeped through every level of command. Luftwaffe intelligence officers interpreted reports of women working in aircraft factories as evidence of American weakness and desperation. They could not comprehend that a democratic society might outproduce a rigid, centrally controlled economy. When intelligence indicated factories operating around the clock in 3 full shifts, German analysts simply assumed the reports were exaggerated. The Nazi worldview simply could not reconcile itself with the reality of the United States. Ford's Willow Run plant became the clearest symbol of American ambition. Construction began on open farmland on April 18, 1941, and it soon grew into the largest factory in the world under a single roof, spanning 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching an entire mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's chief of production, boldly claimed the plant would produce 1B, 24 Liberator bomber every hour, at a time when most factories struggled to complete just 1 per day. the early results were disastrous. The first aircraft, completed in September 1942, had to be almost entirely rebuilt. Quality control failures reached 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run was turning out only 56 bombers per month, far below the hundreds that had been promised. Critics mocked the facility, sneeringly calling it Will It Run. But Ford's engineers refused to give up. They broke the B-24's 488,193 individual parts into standardized subassemblies. They developed hydraulic riveting machines, pre-assembled wiring systems, and fully continuous moving production lines. In 1943 alone, they introduced 578 design improvements, while simultaneously increasing output. By September 1943, production had risen to 148 bombers per month. By December, it reached 365. The decisive breakthrough came in April 1944. That month, Willow Run produced 428 B-24s, one bomber every 63 minutes, operating around the clock 24 hours a day. A single American factory was now producing more aircraft than the entire German aviation industry. German pilots first began to grasp the scale of American industrial power during the fighting in Tunisia. In December 1942, Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, observed, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs. What is most disturbing is that their numbers grow every day." That realization spread rapidly throughout 1943. On January 27th, the Americans carried out their first air attack on Germany itself, with 64 bombers striking Wilhelmshaven. By October, during the infamous Black Thursday raid on Schweinfurt, the United States could lose 60 B-17s and replace them within 2 weeks. The brutal arithmetic of the war had become irreversible. During Big Week, from February 20th to 25th, 1944, the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces flew 3,500 bomber missions aimed directly at destroying German aircraft production. The outcome was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe suffered heavy losses, not only in machines, losing between 262 and 355 fighters, but more critically in experience, with roughly 100 veteran pilots killed or lost, men who could not be replaced. General Adolf Galland warned Göring that Germany was losing around 1,200 fighters each month, while producing only 1,000. The contrast was devastating. The United States was building about 2,500 fighters per month, while losing just 400. Major Heinz Bahr, one of Germany's top aces with 220 confirmed victories, later described a mission over Brunswick in January 1944. The bomber formations, he said, stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds, he recalled. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft production had reached levels beyond anything previously imagined. In that single year, U.S. factories produced 96,270 aircraft, including 16,048 four-engine bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 multi-engine planes. That one-year total alone exceeded Germany's entire wartime aircraft production, which amounted to roughly 94,677 machines. The imbalance went far beyond raw numbers. Every American bomber bristled with heavy-caliber machine guns and carried thousands of rounds of ammunition. German fighters often took off with only partial ammo loads. U.S. bombers were equipped with powered gun turrets, advanced bomb sights, and sophisticated navigation systems, while German fighters frequently lacked even reliable radios. By May 1944, Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle was delivering 16 B-17s every day. Douglas Aircraft, which had employed just 68 people in 1936, had expanded to 167,000 workers across 9 plants. North American Aviation was producing 500 P-51 Mustangs each month. Lockheed was rolling out 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, even as it introduced 2,127 combat-driven design modifications. The supporting industries kept pace with this relentless surge. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines under license. Packard produced 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. Alcoa increased aluminum output by 600%. Dow Chemical expanded magnesium production from 6 million pounds a year to 333 million. The sheer scale and speed of America's industrial mobilization utterly destroyed Nazi assumptions about what the United States was capable of achieving in 1941. Women made up less than 1% of the aircraft workforce. By 1943, they accounted for nearly 65%, around 310,000 women employed across the industry. At Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach plant, 22,389 of the 41,629 workers were women. Roswell Monroe, the woman who inspired the image of Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run, with an extraordinary 99.5% accuracy rate. At Douglas, female inspectors cut defect rates from 3.2% down to just 0.3%. 4 redesigned tools to better fit smaller hands, a change that unexpectedly increased productivity across the board. Lighter pneumatic tools reduced worker fatigue, and improved workstation layouts led to fewer injuries. German intelligence interpreted the presence of women in factories as proof of American weakness. A captured Luftwaffe report dismissed female workers as a temporary measure and predicted a sharp decline in quality. The opposite occurred. Precision rose dramatically. Women proved especially skilled at fine detail tasks, such as wiring, instrument assembly, and inspection. Their contribution became a clear demonstration of democratic strength rather than desperation. As American output surged to unprecedented levels, Germany retreated into dangerous illusion. In February 1944, Göring approved the Jaeger program, dispersing aircraft production into 729 underground sites staffed with forced labor. The Mittelbau complex alone used 60,000 prisoners under brutal conditions, resulting in roughly 20,000 deaths. These underground facilities produced more defects than usable aircraft. Sabotage by coerced workers was widespread. Transporting parts between scattered locations caused severe delays, and quality control virtually disintegrated. The entire middlework system produced fewer engines per month than Ford's single plant in Chicago. At the same time, American innovation accelerated even further. Boeing perfected modular construction of the B-29 across 4 separate plants, with fully interchangeable components. The pressurized B-29, costing $65,000 per aircraft, incorporated technologies Germany could not even replicate at the prototype stage. By early 1945, the United States was producing 100 B-29 bombers every month. June 6, 1944 D-Day represented the dramatic high point of American industrial power. The invasion was supported by 11,590 Allied aircraft, while German forces managed only 319 sorties. A staggering air superiority ratio of 36-1, this advantage went far beyond battlefield tactics. It was a victory of industry itself. Between January and May 1944, Allied preparatory air campaigns dropped 145,000 tons of bombs on German targets, a total that exceeded all German air attacks against Britain over the entire war. On a single day, transport aircraft delivered 3 airborne divisions, using more planes than Germany had ever possessed in its entire transport fleet by December 1944. Individual bombing missions routinely involved 1,200 heavy bombers protected by 900 fighter escorts. The P-51 Mustang had the range to fly as far as Poland, the performance to challenge any opponent, and, most importantly, existed in such overwhelming numbers that losses no longer mattered. German pilots nicknamed them Indians because they seemed to appear everywhere at once as defeat became unavoidable. Even the Nazi leadership began to admit the scale of production catastrophe. In December 1944, Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises of Luftwaffe supremacy now appear to be criminal fantasies. We are fighting the greatest industrial power on earth with nothing but words." Before D-Day, Rundstedt reportedly told his staff, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still crush us. When they land, they will arrive with such overwhelming material superiority that no defensive position can hold." Even Hitler acknowledged the truth in January 1945 during a conversation with Albert Speer. "We should have listened to Boetticher's reports," he admitted. Their industrial capacity was decisive. Where we produce hundreds, they produced tens of thousands. Speer later testified that American air operations reduced German production by 35% in tanks, 31% in aircraft, and 42% in trucks. He stated unequivocally, the systematic American attacks on industrial targets caused the collapse of German armaments production. Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, which became operational in mid-1944, was a genuine technological breakthrough, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft. Hitler and Göring convinced themselves that this miracle weapon could restore air superiority despite Germany's numerical inferiority. In reality, only 1,430 Me-262s were ever built, and at no point were more than 200 operational at the same time. The jet engines themselves required major overhauls after just 10 hours of operation. Shortages of critical materials forced German engineers to rely on inferior substitutes, further undermining reliability. By contrast, the United States had begun jet research as early as 1942. Although the Bell P-59 proved disappointing, Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war ended, and America's immense industrial depth allowed it to pursue several advanced technologies at the same time, a flexibility Germany simply did not possess. This difference perfectly illustrated the outcome of production war. German advances in jet technology meant little when faced with America's ability to mass-produce tens of thousands of conventional fighters, while simultaneously preparing the next generation of aircraft. In a total war, quality without quantity proved meaningless. Hermann Göring's capture on May 8, 1945, by soldiers of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division marked the beginning of his forced reckoning with reality. At the interrogation center in Augsburg, he was initially defiant, insisting that German technology had been superior and defeated only by overwhelming numbers. After his transfer to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, where high-ranking Nazi prisoners were held, questioning intensified. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews that recorded Göring's slow and painful acceptance of American industrial supremacy. I knew American industrial potential was enormous, Göring admitted, but the actual output exceeded even my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its height. It was beyond comprehension. He was particularly stunned by American logistics. Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while maintaining production at home was something we never imagined, he said. We struggled to properly supply troops just 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies operating 5,000 miles from America. At the Nuremberg trials, prosecutors confronted Göring with undeniable evidence of American production dominance, leaving no room for denial to be why in 1944, charges presented to the court made the reality unmistakable. The United States was producing more aircraft in a single month than Germany could manufacture in an entire year. Footage of the vast Willow Run assembly lines was shown as prosecutors methodically named the German cities struck by bombers built at that one factory. During testimony on March 14, 1946, Göring revealed his inability to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred. I believe the economic and technical capacity of the United States, especially in aviation, was extraordinarily large, he said. But I never imagined they could expand aircraft production 100-fold in just 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible. Prison psychologist G.M. Gilbert later recorded Göring's fixation on production statistics. He repeatedly recalculated the numbers, comparing the output of individual American plants to Germany's total wartime production. He appeared especially haunted by Willow Run, referring to it as that powerful factory that broke our backs. When confronted with the figures showing that the United States had produced 812,615 aircraft engines compared to Germany's 241,675, Göring could only stare at the numbers in silence. The mathematical inevitability of defeat could no longer be denied. Even today, the sheer scale of this industrial transformation remains astonishing. From just 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, the United States produced 295,959 by the end of the war, 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft. This achievement was not merely about volume. It reflected a comprehensive, system-wide superiority in manufacturing itself. At its peak, nearly 2 million Americans were employed in aircraft production, representing an unprecedentedly diverse workforce. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, and elderly citizens all contributed. This democratic mobilization accomplished what totalitarian command systems could not. Voluntary cooperation consistently outperformed forced labor by every measure. The workers who entered factories in 1941 with no prior knowledge of aviation emerged in 1945 as the most skilled aircraft workforce in the world. They did more than build airplanes. They fundamentally transformed the very nature of industrial production. Statistical quality control, originally developed for bomber manufacturing, soon became a standard practice across industries worldwide. Automation methods pioneered at Willow Run reshaped global manufacturing systems. The engineers who perfected bomber assembly lines later applied those same principles to building the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s raised a generation that would one day walk on the moon. This production miracle did more than secure victory in war. It ushered in the American century. The financial scale alone defied conventional economic thinking. Aircraft production absorbed $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion in today's terms. The B-29 program by itself cost more than the Manhattan Project. Yet instead of bankrupting the nation, wartime production generated unprecedented prosperity. The unemployment that had defined the Great Depression disappeared entirely. Between 1940 and 1945, personal incomes doubled. Much of this expansion was funded by the workers themselves through war bond purchases. Employees at Willow Run alone bought $45 million in bonds, effectively helping finance the operation of their own factory. Germany, by contrast, devoted nearly 40% of its total industrial capacity to aircraft production by 1944, yet still managed to produce less than half of America's output. Increasing reliance on forced labor proved disastrous. Work disruptions were constant, quality deteriorated, and efficiency collapsed. After 1943, productivity per German worker actually declined, while American productivity surged by 300%. The wartime industrial base became the foundation of post-war prosperity. Aluminum plants built to supply bombers later provided materials for suburban housing. Chemical facilities that produced aviation fuel shifted to manufacturing plastics for consumer goods. Machine tool factories that equipped aircraft plants retooled the entire American industrial economy for global leadership. Beyond sheer output stood extraordinary organizational capability. The War Production Board successfully coordinated 184,000 companies. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of components moving through thousands of suppliers. At MIT, the Radiation Laboratory, employing 4,000 scientists, developed navigation technologies that gave American bombers true all-weather operational capability. When combat revealed the B-17's weakness to head-on attacks, Boeing installed Chin turrets in just 60 days. When operations in the Pacific required greater range, Consolidated modified the B-24 without ever stopping production. In Germany, design changes took months or even years. In America, improvements were implemented in weeks. This flexibility proved just as decisive as sheer output. American aircraft were constantly refined based on real combat experience from across the globe. Lessons learned in Pacific battles reached Atlantic production lines within days. By contrast, German aircraft, built in isolated underground facilities by forced labor, remained largely unchanged, while American designs evolved week by week. The feedback loop between battlefield and factory achieved unprecedented speed. Pilots' observations went straight to engineers. Engineer solutions reached assembly lines within days. Suggestions from assembly line workers flowed directly back to designers. This open, democratic exchange of information consistently outperformed Germany's rigid, hierarchical command system. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final message. In it, He offers clearest acknowledgement of what the production war truly meant. The Americans won through industrial power, not superior military skill, he wrote. We were defeated not by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we dismissed as capable only of producing consumer goods buried the Wehrmacht under aluminum and steel. His final recorded remarks to psychologist G.M. Gilbert echoed the same realization. We declared war on an industrial giant. While it slept, Goring said. When it awakened, our fate was sealed. They did not merely outproduce us. They transformed production itself. Every element of their system proved superior to ours. That night, Goring took his own life. But his last admission stands as history's judgment on the production war. The Reich Marshal who once mocked American capabilities died, knowing that a single American factory had surpassed the lifetime output of his entire Air Force. Today, military historians widely regard America's industrial achievement as the decisive factor behind Allied victory. Without the overwhelming material superiority it created, D-Day could not have succeeded. The strategic air campaign could not have been sustained, and victory in the Pacific would have been impossible. Richard Overy, one of the foremost historians of the Air War, concluded that victory was decided not by morale or tactical genius, but by sheer material weight. The Allies prevailed because they overwhelmed their enemies with an avalanche of production. The numbers leave no room for doubt. By 1944, the United States alone was manufacturing more military aircraft than the entire rest of the world combined, both Axis and Allied nations together. This was not a narrow advantage, but an enormous imbalance. Germany was not simply defeated. It was crushed by overwhelming superiority. Yet the significance of this production miracle extends far beyond military success. It demonstrated the strength of democracy over dictatorship, freedom over tyranny, and voluntary cooperation over coerced obedience. The workers who made this transformation possible were not slaves or conscripts, but free citizens united by a common purpose. Hermann Göring's contempt for American industrial capacity stands as one of history's most disastrous misjudgments. His dismissal of democratic industrial power cost Germany the war and millions of lives. His failure to recognize America's true potential sealed the fate of the Third Reich long before the first bomber ever appeared over German skies. The leap from producing just a few thousand aircraft a year to nearly 100,000 proved that free societies, when confronted with an existential threat, are capable of achieving what seems impossible. American workers did not merely fulfill Roosevelt's ambitious demand, they surpassed it. They did not simply equal German production. They exceeded it fivefold while simultaneously sustaining a global war in the Pacific. Modern leaders would do well to remember Göring's mistake, to dismiss democratic nations as weak because they value peace, or to underestimate the productive power of free people because they pursue prosperity rather than conquest, is to invite catastrophic error. In 1940, America appeared unready for war. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial giant. The arsenal of democracy proved that factory floors could be as decisive as battlefields, that assembly line workers could matter as much as soldiers, and that industrial mobilization could determine victory just as surely as military strategy itself. Göring learned this lesson far too late, paying for it with the ruin of his country. From his mocking reaction to Roosevelt's announcement in May 1940 to his execution in October 1946, Hermann Göring's life traced the same downward path as Nazi Germany itself. His scorn for American industrial power became the epitaph of the Third Reich, a regime that substituted ideology for capability, mistook oppression for strength, and believed racial fantasy could triumph over the cold mathematics of industry. The Reich Marshal who once laughed at America's ability to build aircraft ultimately stood as a symbol of a system destroyed by its own delusions.